This was summer of 2017. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying a nice beer after work, when suddenly, something caught my attention from across the street. No idea what it was, because all I saw was this really bright light in the sky, like some sort of UFO. Of course, I wasn't sure, so I stayed seated and watched as this light came closer to my house, nearly hovering over the roof of the garage. At this point, I knew this was not a conventional aircraft, nor some kind of drone. There was no sound, and the light just hung over us for several minutes. Then, without warning or any noise whatsoever, it began moving up, transcending up into the sky at incredibly fast speed. Then, it shot off into the horizon, leaving nothing more than a glowing trail behind it, lasting several seconds before evaporating completely. I was stunned. I didn't think it's possible to not be perplexed when something like this happens. And the way it just vanished without a trace. It was freaky. I was so shocked that I didn't have the presence of mind to take pictures or video. By the time I got inside for my camera, it was long gone. Overcome by curiosity, I did some research the next day and it came across incidents similar to mine, but all over the country. I'd like to think there's a possibility it might have been some kind of alien spacecraft that just lost power and maybe was trying to access electricity, but that's probably just stupid thinking. Although, the way it came without warning and left just as abruptly as suspiciously similar to how people describe UFO sightings. Back when I lived in Australia, there were so many reports of UFOs around Perth. The media would run specials about them every other week. We even had our own X-Files type TV show where they followed different groups of Australians who would go hunting for said UFOs on the weekends. It was actually pretty cool. But seriously, I doubt aliens would waste their time hovering over my house if they just wanted to hang out. I mean, the trail of light was incredibly bright and long-lasting. If it had been for some sort of drone with a powerful spotlight, I feel like I would have at least heard some kind of engine sound had this been a real aircraft. Anyway, while there is technically no evidence from this, besides my own eyewitness account, to back any of this up, I still think it's worth mentioning these incidents in general. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time anybody came forward with proof after seeing something like this. I've kind of given up on the idea of finding out what it was. I mean, if it was some secret government experiment or an actual alien craft, why would it leave behind any evidence? And even if there had been a photograph, by the time I had got my camera, the trail had already evaporated. Who knows how often this has gone on during my lifetime without me ever knowing. Even more frightening is wondering whether or not these things have ever caused harm to people on Earth. I had a UFO sighting back in the spring of 2011. I was visiting my sister in Green Bay and was outside looking at the stars before going off to bed. While watching the sky, this extremely bright light caught my attention. I stared at this for a few seconds before it began to take off across the sky, moving extremely fast until fully out of sight within just a few seconds. I immediately went inside and told everybody what I just saw. They would probably think I was nuts, but nobody did. My fiance, who was with me, said that he had seen the same thing, the same object only 5 minutes prior, but decided not to say anything. He didn't want to get me mad, and there was also other people there who claimed that they had never seen anything like that before. They said it looked as though the object had moved towards us and maybe watched it across the sky. My fiance and I had just started dating, and we grew up on a farm with a lot of farmland around us, so we were used to seeing planes and things like that going overhead pretty frequently. But neither of us had ever seen anything like what we saw that night. We still wonder, all this time later, if anybody else on Earth actually saw it. I mean, it must have been pretty huge if everybody in Green Bay who lives there has seen things like this before. Well, later that summer, I moved from Illinois to Wisconsin, so I don't know if I would have another chance to encounter anything like this soon. But I know what I saw, and it's something that is real and something that has forever changed me. Now, I've read about various things like swamp gas or orbs of light, but nothing that can move that fast or change direction the way this did. My fiancé thinks it's possible that there are parallel universes or dimensions next to our own, which may be why we never see any proof of aliens before. Maybe these beings can choose their own and pop in and out of different universes and dimensions as they please. This allows them to always stay one step ahead of us. I don't know. All I know is that what I saw with my own eyes. And if I hadn't seen it myself, I would think we were crazy. And I know better. I think it might be a little bit of both though, because I've always gone with the thought that this particular type of thing was never really meant to be seen by anyone. But perhaps nobody else saw it, so they decided not to come back. I mean, who would? All I know is that UFOs are definitely real. I saw something that night that I can't ever describe, and I'm pretty sure this was an alien craft of some kind. I was out on the lake fishing, like I always do on Wednesday evenings, and I saw this bright light in the sky. At first, I thought it might be a craft or an airplane, but then it stopped in midair and disappeared for a short while. Shortly after, another one of these same bright lights appeared at the same spot, kind of like flickering in and out, but you couldn't see a craft. Before long, there were 4 or 5 of these exact same lights, parallel, lined up right next to each other, hovering in place. Then, they're kind of moving around off in the distance, and I'm keeping watch mainly out of curiosity, because I'm trying to figure out in my mind what sort of planes are these. And then, they all start to descend towards the ground in unison. And then, something even more strange occurred. There's this really weird sound, and it started vibrating every part of my body, especially in my chest area. You know how sometimes you get that loud ringing in your ear? Imagine that, but coming from all over. And the next thing I know, I can't control my hands. It was like somebody else was in charge of them, forcing me to drop my fishing rod in the water. I couldn't move or scream, and all I could do was watch as I lost control of my body. That's when I realized I had begun to close my eyes, out of fear and partially muscle control, unsure of what may come next. All of a sudden, I can feel my body start to move against my will, as I was losing consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, everything seemed bright and foggy around me, even though at the same time, I could sort of see clearly, somehow. I know that's hard to explain. The next thing I know, I woke up in my bed and found myself staring at the ceiling in disbelief, confused about what had just happened. Even though I was in my own bed, I was still in my clothes that I had gone out in Wednesday evening. It was Thursday morning, 3:34 to be exact, and my left leg hurt really bad, feeling like I had kicked a brick wall. It hurt really bad. I couldn't find anything wrong with it though. No marks or nothing. I have no way to account for what happened to me out there. Could you help me? I had gone to bed like any other night. In fact, this was no different than any other night that I went to sleep. And it was around midnight when I woke up from seeing a strange light shining in my window. I remember a sort of being in a daze and feeling a presence had entered into my room. As I'm trying to come to, I start to see these shapes materialize in my room. Have you ever seen the movie The Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger? Do you remember how in that movie, the Predator kind of took on this weird translucent cloaking device? It made the light around its body warp and bend. That's kind of how these figures looked. Like the shape of human beings, but the light was bending around their bodies. I was worried for my safety, and at the same time, trying to grasp what I was looking at. I'm not sure how long it had been before I was able to muster up enough courage to scream out in fear. But when I did that, They all appeared to just vanish. I ran downstairs, grabbed a baseball bat, and prepared to defend myself against whatever kind of intruder might be lurking in the shadows. The only thing on my mind was to get assistance from somebody else, so that they could witness what had just happened upstairs. That's when we found strange footprints on the carpet. The feet prints were very weird. They were shaped in a webbed footing shape. Something had been in my house. I wasn't sure what. That experience alone has scarred me for life. And if not careful, I fear something may return one night to finish me off or do worse things. I have no idea what these creatures' intentions were, or what they were. Ghosts, demons, aliens, I don't care. Whatever their desire was for me, it was nefarious and sinister, I believe. I'm not exactly sure what these things were, or, like I said, what they wanted with me. And it's been quite a while since this all happened, but I've only told my story to one other person. The only thing that really sticks out from this entire thing is that I got this really bad scratch on my arm, and it did not heal for a long time. I even had scans done on it to see if there was anything stuck in my arm or anything like that. Nothing showed up, of course, but it was very unusual. My mind is still plagued with questions of what exactly came in my room that night. Back in the beginning of 2014, I was planning on taking a trip to Utah. It appeared really fun, and my friend told me about some place called Newcastle. I woke up one morning, around 6 a.m. to get ready for my trip. I left from Reno, Nevada, after packing some essentials into my pack, like clothes, a compass, a knife, etc. I'd been going through the hills for a few hours now. It was 8 a.m. when I came to the edge of a forest and decided this would be a good place to get a little catnap. So, I put my car in park, turned it off, and fell asleep. I woke up about 2 hours later, ate some beef jerky, and got back on the road. I was only about 4 hours away from my current location. I reached this bridge that had been abandoned long ago, not soon after. There were rusted cars everywhere, and the smell was like dead, rotting animal. It gave me really bad goosebumps, but I pushed through and kept going. I realized that not far away from me were shapes and figures moving towards my vehicle at incredible speed, and a feeling of dread came over me as they came closer. I knew something was off, and so I started to slow down. I can barely remember what happened because I blacked out, but the next thing I know is I am flooring it and driving away from these figures chasing me. I drove for hours, music blasting to try and distract myself from what just happened. One of them again appeared in the road in front of me. It stood there looking at me, and all I could do was sit there frozen in fear as it stared into my eyes, like it was gazing into my soul, my very core of my person. Then it just disappeared. But I don't know if it was gone for good, so I took that opportunity, and I sped and I sped. Had these things caught up to my car, there's no telling what they would have done to me, but it could not have been good. It's been a while now since this encounter, and even every night, it feels like the same memories come back to haunt me. Seeing their eerily black eyes scares the living lights out of me to this day. As I had just gotten done playing a gig around midnight in Liverpool, it was lightly drizzling outside, but kind of on and off. The roads were pretty empty, which is always nice, as the city can be a nightmare to drive through, even with minimal amounts of traffic. I was waiting for my girlfriend to come pick me up from a gig. So I was walking around the building, about to have a smoke. Upon reaching a corner, that where my girlfriend would pick me up at, I noticed something across the road, illuminated by the light over it, just outside of a convenience store area, where there would normally be a lot of people during the day. And from where I stood, this looked like some sort of strange big animal. I couldn't make out an exact definite shape or form, as it was pretty dark, and I was standing across the main road looking at it, but noticed that one thing it made me think something wasn't right. This being or animal was opaque and looked very strange. It was also standing up on two legs, almost entirely black. What I didn't see was any fur. It definitely did not look like any animal I'd ever seen before. Its body was sleek, black, and moved very strange, like its body was made of water or something. It kind of reminded me of a bear standing upright, or a big monkey, but it obviously wasn't. Its eyes were also kind of glowing this green color, and it felt like I was locked in a gaze with this thing for 5 minutes, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't that long. I felt like I should back away before whatever this thing is notices me. So I quickly turned around and went back around the corner. I swear to you, within the next 60 seconds, it went from not raining, but downpouring. The air felt like a thunderstorm was coming, and within the next 5 minutes, thunder and lightning began crashing and thundering. Here I am, trying to pack all my stuff up, and by the time I get everything and all my gear ready, it's probably been about 15 minutes since I had last gone outside. The weather had gone from bad to worse, and now it's raining cats and dogs. I'm trying to find a way from getting caught in the storm, and I have a light for my phone, so I'm trying to find my girlfriend who was there to pick me up. Just then, as she pulls up, we start hearing this strange sound all around us. Even my girlfriend was pretty perplexed. It creeped me out, so I hopped in the car and off I went. It sounded like metal being scraped against metal, but it was very, very loud, and it was not thunder. The entire drive, the air around us felt full of static electricity, and the sky looked unusually dark, even for a thunderstorm. But eventually it would stop pouring for a bit of time. Look, I'm a pretty level-headed guy for the most part, but I can't help but feel all the things I experienced that day were in direct correlation with one another. The static air, the meteorological anomaly of all things. I can't help but feel like something was trying to stop me. Could it be ghosts, aliens, the universe, or unnatural forces? Who knows? Either way, I have no true way to explain what I saw that evening. Out in the back pastures at my grandma's farm, a large ash tree that is around 3 to 4 feet wide is one of the oldest trees near her house. This tree has an ancient magic around it, or so it feels. The energy surrounding it is just different. The bark was gray with black spots and had many branches all over the top half that would keep dying. It was strange. It stretched out about 30 feet long overall, ample room for several people to stand around it. Like I said, anytime you got one or more people around it, the energy would seem to shift. And that's not all. My cousin once explained she saw something big run behind around the tree and decided to go back there and see what it could have been. She wasn't very specific about what happened. I found nothing but felt like I was being watched when I went back there myself. I felt this strange feeling all around me, like the atmosphere and energy was changing. It just didn't feel safe. It felt dangerous. Another night, I was driving home from my grandmother's house, and as I drove by the tree lines surrounding the outer parts, I always do, the road curves, and as I approached, something caught my eye. There was a large figure standing behind one of those ash trees near the entrance to her property. This figure stood roughly 7 feet tall, very broad shoulders, but hunched over, like it was sick or dying, with its hands holding onto the tree trunk. This was pretty late, and there were no other lights out besides my headlight. I had a hard time making out specific features other than the dark hair and what looked like light fur. Its face, though, was wide and appeared to have sunken-in cheeks and eyes. This figure slowly turned its head to look at me. I could also tell that even in the darkness, it had a very large nostril. Well, Since we live in an age where Bigfoot and Bigfoot-like creatures and many other cryptids are viewed as real, I think whatever this thing is was real too. It gets even more strange. We had also seen these strange lights in the sky around the same time frame. My grandmother is very spiritual and open-minded about these sorts of things. She said that what we had seen was probably an alien. At the time, I didn't really put much thought into it, since I never believed in aliens or UFOs. But after seeing this creature up close, I'm not so sure anymore. Didn't do anything really. Grew up hunting like most people in my family and had hunted plenty of deer before. Never ran into one of those creatures we ever had come across. I mean, it did look vaguely human. It made me question if my cousin saw something, or maybe she was just seeing things. Plus, I grew up with that type of stuff all around me, like everybody else in that area, since that's what you grow up around when you are surrounded by farmland. I didn't get freaked out about it. But of course, this was before I had my own sighting. I don't think it's an alien because, if that were the case, why was it hiding behind trees? I mean, maybe it could pass as one of those gray aliens, but this thing looked more like a Bigfoot. Is it possible there are aliens and Bigfoot activity on my grandmother's property? And that's what we've been experiencing. It seems like quite a lot to account for, but I'm no expert. And I also don't think there's any connections between aliens and Bigfoot at all, in my opinion. Because the thing we saw was more like a Sasquatch and not an alien. What do you guys think? Please, help me out with your opinions. It was around noon on a sunny day. Not too hot or humid, considering it's Washington. There was not much traffic on this road at the time, but what we saw that day, I'm not exactly sure what you would consider it. Washington is home to a lot of wildlife, but this one takes the cake. We did not see what we thought we were going to. We did not expect to see a human-like animal on its hind legs, standing taller than a man. And for a moment, it looked like something out of a science fiction movie. But this was not what we came for. There were two of these things standing roughly 30 feet away, on the other side of the tree line, but totally visible. At first, their backs were to us, and they made no attempts to notice us as we appeared to enter their territory, or what I assumed to be their territory. They first seemed interested in something. I'm not sure what it could have been, because their large bodies were blocking our field of view, and they seemed perfectly calm about everything, as if nothing new or even interesting to them anymore popped up. It looked like something taken right out of those old black and white horror films. You know, a large, creepy costume, shaggy hair all over its body, and dirty-looking skin. Then, it turned around and noticed us, and that's when it went from calm to very aggressive, like they were filled with this almost primal anger, directed at us for no apparent reason. This, of course, though, wasn't until it noticed us. When we drove past it, we thought it was the strangest thing in the world, but both of us were in total shock. This is the part of Washington where a lot of UFO sightings have been reported, and it made us wonder if we had just seen one. I'm not sure with how familiar you are with Washington State, but the state is home to thousands upon thousands of strange sightings and sounds of lights in the sky, crafts that can't be identified, and bizarre sounds off in the woods. I almost wonder if what we saw that day has anything to do with aliens or the UFOs. I'm not sure what it could have been, but I know that the only explanation for this is that it had to be some kind of extraterrestrial life, possibly walking around our forests. It's hard to imagine like this, living so close, without knowing it exists in the first place. I would love to know what they're doing here, and I would love to think that if we weren't told Earth was being visited by aliens, who knows how long they'd be able to stay hidden before anybody truly saw them from the public. I guess at least now, there are stories being told about them. It makes me wonder if more people have encountered these things before, or are just now coming out of the shadows. I'm not sure if anybody else has encountered these strange creatures before me, or do they even exist at all? Did I simply imagine it? I could only imagine what it would be like for somebody to see these things up close and personal, how that would shape a person's world differently. I wonder about what the truth is and where all of this is concerned. Maybe one day we'll figure it out if any kind of mind-blowing extraterrestrial life form is really visiting this planet. It was a slow, hot day in the summer. I was at a lake or the beach of a lake with my family, swimming, boating, and most importantly, having fun. As summer usually is, it had been hot all day, but when the sun began to set, I was starting to get tired of being in the water and decided to go sit on the shoreline. I found a small rock outcropping that stuck out onto the lake near our picnic site. A bit of shade from the trees nearby made this the perfect spot to relax without overheating. I sat down, facing the lake, using my own sweatshirt as a pillow. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, there was something just outside my field of vision at the water's edge. The things around me suddenly got increasingly bright very fast. It was disorientating, and it took me a few seconds to realize, and it was a light that I don't recall ever seeing in my life. It's hard to explain, but it wasn't a kind of light you face here on Earth. I felt something warm grab onto my shoulders. I must have panicked, because whatever was holding me squeezed hard enough for it to really hurt. I recall screaming, but the light was so bright, I couldn't see anything except for a silhouette. I felt like I was trying to fight it off of me, but I just felt powerless. Before I could free myself, I felt like I woke up completely conscious on a cold steel medical table. I couldn't move. I realized I had restraints around my wrists and ankles, not like what you have here on Earth. These were strange looking and prevented me from moving in any way, shape, or form. My head was also held in place by some kind of helmet mask-like apparatus. It only covered part of my head, and my nose was fully exposed. I could hardly see anything, but I could hear the whir of servos and the sound of some kind of fluid being pumped into my nasal passages. It was then I noticed several large figures looming over me, speaking in this harsh, unintelligible language I had never heard before. Panic had set in. I could only see their silhouettes against the bright lights shining down on me. The one holding my shoulders was large and dark, its head just a giant shadow, obscuring any real details. The ones examining me with some kind of scanners moved around in a blur. Their bulky exoskeletons and strange appendages make them look like giant praying mantises. The time after that seemed to be a blur. I tried to resist as best I could, but I was so weak. Whatever sedative they were pumping into my system was making it increasingly hard for me to think clearly. I never felt so drugged up before. It was like this sedation I can't even begin to describe. It was incredibly traumatizing. I remember them taking this small metal-looking tool and shoving it right into my arm, and I can't describe to you how that felt. It wasn't like anything I've ever experienced before. This was a hot iron poker, shoving into my veins and arteries. It was incredibly painful. I faded out after that. The next thing I know, I'm waking back up on the shore of the lake, right near our picnic site. I was screaming. The light was now gone, and everything seemed so dark after that unbearable brightness. Everybody was staring at me like I was some lunatic. I was now screaming and crying uncontrollably, trying to explain what had happened. They must have thought I'd hit my head or something. Nobody could see what was going on. I began nervously looking around, scratching at my arm, which hurt horribly bad. But where they poked me, there were no visible marks at all. My family tried their best to comfort me, but explained I probably just had a horrible nightmare. I'm not a believer in UFOs or aliens, but there is no other explanation for what happened to me that night. That was not any kind of nightmare. It was real. I don't believe this was a nightmare. I believe I was actually abducted and experimented on. I'm not the only one who has had this happen to them either. There are others out there just like me. Somebody needs to take these aliens seriously before they experiment on others. I don't know if it's relevant, but while I was slipping in and out of consciousness on that table, I swore I caught a glimpse. I saw some kind of symbol being burned into the skin of the upper part of my stomach. It was something that no human could have done to me. It must have been burned there while I was passed out. I don't know if anybody will believe me, but that same symbol will still appear in my stomach at night sometimes, just randomly, and then go away. The following weeks after this happened, I was extremely sick. It felt like some kind of flu or something going around, but it was different. Whatever the aliens were doing to me made it harder for my body to recover from the sickness, like this normally would have. Maybe they planted a sickness in my body. I feel like even that thought is so ridiculous. I don't know. I just can't explain that horrible flu I had. It was the worst sickness I'd ever endured. Since then, I've been struck with vivid nightmares after that night. Vivid enough to where I was scared to sleep. And the dreams will happen randomly. But they mainly focus on what happened in the lab where I was drugged. At least I assume it was a lab. It seems to kind of fade in and out when it comes time for that abduction. But I'll get a recap of what happened when I'm in there. In these dreams, it's like you could see my perspective from the room where they were keeping me. When this happens, it starts with them operating on me and doing things. It was like surgical torture. I know it sounds weird, but the most prominent dreams are where they would give me something through an IV, and my body starts shaking involuntarily, like I'm having a seizure of some kind. It's very disturbing. Seeing these things happen to me in my dreams, it's not hard to wake myself up from every time this happens. I don't know what else to say. They were experimenting on me. I dreamt about this symbol again last night, exactly like it was in reality after the abduction. I'm probably being paranoid, but I feel that I have proof of alien abduction. All I want is someone to believe me. I want somebody who will finally take these things seriously. Whatever ruined part of me that night, I pray to God never lets it happen again. The pain was unbearable. I'm still not sure what happened to me that day, and I haven't told anybody because it sounds like some kind of crazy hallucination. If anybody out there has had this happen to them or knows what happened that day, please help me. I'm not sure if I'll ever feel safe again living in my own home. If you have any information about where I can go for verification on that symbol burned into my stomach, anything at all would be great. I was driving my car into town at approximately 11 a.m. It was Friday morning. I recall the exact date was October 7th. This is important for me because it was also my birthday. I was driving down this road called Old Highway 52 in Walton County, Florida, which eventually turns into Highway 984. The road is not well maintained, and there are many cracks and potholes throughout the old dirt road. Many people often take this shortcut instead of taking Highway 331, which is the main one, because it is faster and much less traveled. As I was driving, I noticed my odometer started going backwards. What? I remember saying to myself. Confused, I turned down the volume of my car radio, listening for any strange sounds coming from my engine. I couldn't hear anything wrong at all with the way my car sounded. I looked out my window and saw that the sky was now starting to turn from blue to a dark gray. I looked out the opposite window and saw that it was still clear. A few moments later, what happened to be a rip in space, or so I would describe, opened up above my car, rippling the entire length of the road. By this time, I had begun going uphill towards Highway 331. As I was passing under this rip in space above me, everything around me began to go black. The rip in space I'm referring to was like this glowing strange light, no more than 50 feet above my vehicle in the air. It was like this flat, 2D rectangular shape. After everything went black for just a moment, everything came back, except for the light of day. It was now nighttime, specifically 10:14 p.m. at night. Yet, I was in the exact same spot on the road as I had been when this started. No more than 10 seconds had actually passed since everything had faded to black. So I pulled over on the side of the road in complete shock, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I pulled out my phone. It confirmed it. 10:14. The date was the same. I pulled up my Instagram to see just how accurate this information was. There had been posts that had been made by people I'm following hours ago, which would have been earlier in the evening. I was in utter shock. How is it that I just fast-forwarded 11 hours of time? I don't know how long it took me to get my bearings together, but I know it was more than 10 minutes, probably closer to 30. A little while later, I looked up just to see how common this is, and as it turns out, people have actually been reported missing time all over the world. But it seems to happen more frequently with people that live in rural areas. The most common explanations are a glitch in the matrix, interdimensional travel, people having a moment of clarity where they come across some fundamental truth about themselves, the universe, or reality, and of course, alien abductions. Because I was under the assumption that this is a rare phenomena, I'm not sure what compelled me to look it up on Instagram of all places. But after doing so, I've come across a few people who have reported these jumps in time. Let me know if you have any other stories you could share, as I'm trying my best to not only comprehend it, but learn more. My experience happened on a September evening in 2012, around 6 p.m. I was walking to my mailbox, and I heard this rush of strange sounds. I looked around but didn't see anything unusual, so I continued. As I turned back around to the house, I stopped in my tracks. As my peripheral, I spotted this figure hovering no more than 20 feet above my house, staring at me. It looked no more than 3 to 4 feet tall at most, and what I saw was this very tall, stereotypical gray alien, large black eyes staring down at me. It of course looked humanoid, and if you've ever seen a gray alien, you would know what I'm talking about. It was naked, having no hair, and of course the large dark eyes. It stared me down for several seconds, not moving or breathing, before I lost it, screaming, running back towards my house. I locked the door firmly and prayed. Nothing happened. I have no mental illness. Neither does my family. At least, not anything that ran in our bloodlines. This was no hallucination. I know what I saw. After thoroughly searching through images on Google, I have concluded that the being I saw was indeed an extraterrestrial, rather than some sort of strange creature, or bird, or cryptid, or whatever. I feel very confused and disturbed by what I had seen. It didn't make sense. I was afraid, and I think that aliens are evil. But this wasn't aggressive. I still think about it, and I do have nightmares from time to time. But I have no doubt that what I saw was real and not a dream or my imagination, like some people would try to make me believe. I was sitting out in my car one evening, kind of just scouting for deer, very loosely. It had been a pretty rough day at work, and I had gotten into a pretty bad fight with the old lady. I just needed some time to de-stress, to think. You probably know what it's like to be a man and clear your head, especially getting away from family. That's very important. So on this evening, I was sitting out in my car, again, looking for deer. It's something that's very relaxing and cathartic for me. And I notice off in the distance, way off on the horizon, there's this strange blinking red light. Now, it's not unusual to see planes coming to and from. That's pretty common. But this was a red light that wasn't moving. It just kind of kept flickering back and forth, growing in size and then shrinking again, but never actually seeming to move beyond the horizon. I watched this more now curiously, finding it very strange of what I was seeing. Don't think right away that I assumed it was a UFO. I had no idea what it was. It was just bizarre looking. And then it started to move very quickly from left to right, as if it was shaking or something. And then it just suddenly vanished, like the light just burned out. I did not see any craft accompanying this light or anything, even moving across the night sky. I thought that was very strange. And then, after maybe a minute or so later, I kind of went back to watching the deer, and this red light again appears, much closer this time. Except this time, it's fading in and out much slower. It would kind of pulsate, if that makes sense. Very dimly, and then very bright. Very dim, and very bright. But again, much slower. Because it was so much closer, I got out of my truck, looking at this thing overhead. Well, not directly overhead, but maybe at least 500 to 1,000 yards away from me, over the tree line. And it was just this bright light. I noticed that it wasn't attached to any craft, at least not that I could see. And here I am, looking at this, trying to formulate what I was looking at exactly. I had no concept of what this was, and I'd never seen anything like it in my life. It was just this pulsating light that didn't seem to be attached to anything. And so in that moment, I decided maybe it would be a good idea to leave. I didn't really feel safe. It's not like I felt threatened or anything, but I don't know. My fight or flight senses, I guess, kicked in. So I hopped back in my truck, put the key in the ignition, and as I go to turn the car on, nothing. The battery had been completely killed. The car wouldn't even do anything. I keep trying and trying. The truck was dead. Now what am I going to do? As I look back up, the pulsating light had dissipated once again. Everything, even the night crickets, had gone completely silent. That's when I felt pretty eerie all around me. It's like your skin just crawls. Your body is able to sense things that you normally can't. And that's kind of how I felt in that moment. The woods seemed darker than usual too. In fact, the entire night around me appeared darker. I felt confused and disturbed, trying to get my car to work, but it seemed like everything I was doing, I could not get it to turn back on. So I sat there, thinking what I would do, and in that moment, I popped the hood. Maybe or possibly the battery became disconnected. There had to have been a logical explanation for why the car would not even go on. So, after getting out and looking under the hood, I didn't spot anything that looked out of the ordinary. Everything was connected. I tested the battery. It had plenty of juice. But for whatever reason, the car would not turn on. Everything mechanically looked like it should be, operating and fully functional. Now, I'm not a mechanic by any stretch of the means, but I know how to diagnose basic problems and how to know if my car should turn on or off. And there's no reason electronically or mechanically why my vehicle should not be turning on. So I sat back in my truck, completely astonished as to why my vehicle would not turn on. I decided to pull up my phone and maybe pull up YouTube to see if I can find any possible explanations. Because of where I'm at, my service is very poor. This was a pretty rural area, so I didn't expect the greatest. But as I'm trying to pull up a YouTube video, I start to hear this loud humming noise. It sounded like really loud machinery, but it was very, very loud, and it was very low in pitch. It sounded like maybe something underground. That's just a guess. And the humming continued to grow gradually in noise and decibel volume. I looked around, trying to see a source of this noise, but I couldn't find anything. So I kind of just shrugged my shoulders and went back to try and searching on YouTube. The noise continued to grow louder and louder until it sounded like it was close by. Just then, my truck randomly turns on. Keep in mind the key is in the ignition, but the key is also not even in the on spot in the ignition. I was completely confused by this, looking at my key spot and realizing there is something very wrong here. Worried that my car was going to fry itself, I turned the key to the on position. The car did nothing, but continued to stay on. And the machinery humming noise only continued to grow in noise. That's when this next thing happened. Because of my truck turning on, obviously the headlights came on with it. And directly in front of me, I see these small black figures moving out of the woodline towards me. I say small figures because they didn't have a shape. They just looked like small people, fully black. It's like light around them was bouncing off of them and being fully absorbed. They were just shadows. But I'll tell you, the second I saw these shadows or whatever they are, I got a chill down my spine. I threw my car in drive, praying it would go, and it did. Throwing my phone in the seat next to me, I floored out of there so fast you wouldn't believe, and the humming sound kind of slowly dissipated the further away I drove. My house was only about 12 minutes away, and I at least did double the speed getting back there than I did getting out here. The speed limit around these roads is about 40 miles an hour, but you bet I did about 70 or 80 to get back home. I get back home, jump out of my truck, and run in the house. My wife, who was still pretty pissed at me from our earlier argument, looked at me strangely because she saw how spooked I was. And I said, "Honey, you won't believe what happened." I sat her down and explained what happened to me. She kind of half believed me, half didn't, and she said, "Well, it could have just been a nightmare, or you could have dozed off, or maybe you were drinking." I had to physically shake her and explain to her, "No, I don't believe in this kind of stuff. This was real. I saw something out there. I don't know what it was, but I have no way to describe it. This was not normal." She didn't really have an answer for me. She knows I'm not the type of person to believe in anything other than real life. I call it real life because it's stuff that you wouldn't encounter on any other normal day in your life. And I realize my encounter probably sucks, but it took me quite a while to come to terms with what happened. Now, as time has passed, I believe that I had some sort of alien UFO experience. I feel silly saying that, like I should have some sort of tinfoil hat on. That's just natural and the way society has made me feel. But can I blame them? Even thinking about it just seems so crazy and out of the normal. I have a hard time even accepting that as a possible outcome. But I simply cannot explain the lights, the humming noises, and the shadows I saw coming out of the trees, coming in my direction. So I'll just let this information sit with you. You can be the judge on what you think it could have been. Maybe it was just a bad dream. Maybe my wife is right. We never talked about it again after that. That was the end of it. If we're honest, I had no desire to bring it up again in conversation. I would prefer to leave it where it needs to stay, in the past. I was still in high school when this happened to me. I went to school that day. Everything was normal, up until I got there later than usual. I ended up being late for class, and I had a play that day I had to perform in. The teachers were nice enough to let me go on stage, even though I had been missing most of my class period. They knew I hadn't done it on purpose, and of course, were very supportive in general. I was very good about my scheduling and attendance. Afterwards, though, things got really weird when I got back home. For example, even though I was in the play, my mom, who had come to see me, explained that she had not seen me in the play at all, even though I was one of the main characters. She wondered if maybe I'd gotten sick or just missed me altogether, which is pretty strange to think about. I explained to her. I told her, "Mom, I was in the play the entire time. How did you not see me?" The conclusion was that I must have just not been up on stage, or maybe she got there late and had missed me. We kind of shrugged our shoulders and were not really sure where this would go. It had already been a very strange evening. After dinner and a shower, things got to get seriously scary when I went to bed. I was getting ready to fall asleep, but realized that there was this strange light outside my window. Well, I was trying to figure out what it was for a few moments. These lights got really bright, and then disappeared again. Then I heard what sounded like something hit up against the glass behind my blinds. I looked over and I could see this faint shape pushing itself up against the glass. This wasn't normal. This completely freaked me out, because the shape was like a deformed person. Super thin, no nose, and black eyes bulging, pressing against the glass. I felt traumatized. I couldn't look away, but I couldn't pull myself to look at this face any longer. I felt fear cover my entire body. What's crazy is that I live on the second story of my house, or I did when this happened. Whatever this figure or thing was, a creature, demon, angel, alien, I don't know what it was, had to have been hovering, because again, second story, which means I'm at least 10 feet off the ground. And it's not like the face that pressed against my window was so large it was 20 feet tall. It's not like this was a giant here. In fact, a face that comes to my mind is from the movie Lord of the Rings, in the very first movie. It's actually when everybody was in that tomb, and there's a one scene in particular that shows this really scary goblin face. Not exactly like this goblin though. It was more darker in color and had large black eyes, but similar to that. Sharp, wretched teeth, no nose, and just really large eyes. Really ugly looking too. Now imagine that pressing itself up against the glass, staring into you, like it wanted to hurt you, like you were some defenseless prey, and it was just taunting you, ready to come get you. It felt like an eternity, but after some time, it appeared to kind of float away from the window and disappeared. You bet I was too scared to fall asleep after that. So I just turned on all my lights, texted my friends, and asked if they were okay. Asking if they had seen me at the play earlier that day. Some of them said yes, some of them said no, even though these were the same friends that I had been in the play with. As crazy and weird as my story is, I have a few conclusions that may or may not make sense. As far as the play goes, the only thing I can imagine is I somehow came into contact with another dimension or an alternate reality, potentially altered by this UFO or alien, angel, demon that I'd encountered later that evening. I'm only guessing that there's a connection between my sighting that evening and what had happened at the play earlier. But explain to me, how is it in any way possible that a play that I was one of the main stars in, half of my friends never saw me in it, and my mom never saw me up on stage, yet I was actually there? In fact, I remember talking to my play director that morning and afternoon, right as I was going up on stage. I even remember having a conversation with her after the play about a part or a line that I had misdone. Are alternate realities and universes even a thing, where you may or may not do something in that reality? Is it possible that alternate realities ever converge into one, where some people experience one reality, and you and other people might experience another? Is it possible that I somehow opened these two open, and that is why I had the encounter that night that I did? Was this angel, demon, alien, or being have anything to do with these two realities converging? I could only assume as much. This all began when I was driving home from the store. I was almost home, and it was getting dark outside, so I had my high beams on. When I got to my house, I pulled into the driveway and shut off my car, but left my headlights on for a moment, since it was still bright enough to do that safely. I had this weird thing that whenever I pull into park somewhere, even if it is nighttime, I try and leave my lights on for just a moment. I know it's very strange sounding, but it's like an extra safety mechanism for me. However, as soon as they shut off, I noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye at about 2 o'clock from me. To give a reference point, right next to your seat towards your door is 12 o'clock. Just at the edge of the light, retreating back into the darkness from where it came. The thing looked exactly like a person, but it was entirely black, darker than any shade of black I'd ever seen. My immediate reaction was fear, because at first, I thought this was a potential intruder just hiding behind my house, and I wasn't exactly sure what was going to happen. so I slowly got out of my car and went to go look. I did keep bear mace on me at all times, actually attached to my keychain in case I would ever have to use it. Thankfully, even now as of 2021, I still have not had to use it on anybody. Situation I thought was going to be the perfect time I got to use it. I looked and crept around the corner. Nothing. There was nobody there after all. Whatever I had saw had disappeared back into the darkness. So I didn't think much of it afterwards, honestly. Just figured maybe it was just me being overly exhausted and frankly half asleep, so I wasn't really focused on it anymore. I was relieved and let it go. Plus, where I live, I'm kind of out in the boonies. There shouldn't really be much people out here anyway, and why would somebody try to be watching me or want to break in? Well, anyway, I went inside and played some video games with my brother for a while to try and distract myself. I wasn't really scared about it at all, honestly, but there was something off about whatever I saw, and even though I had let it go, it kept coming up in my head, like the whole thing just felt wrong somehow, especially because when you see a shape like that, you're pretty sure an intruder is about. And had it disappeared like it did, there's nowhere for anybody to go. I can't think of my eyes ever playing tricks on me like that, because I did actually see something. I know I'm probably not making sense, but my mind just kept going back on what I saw, and realizing and thinking to myself, that wasn't just me hallucinating it or having some sort of vision. This was real. It was maybe 2 in the morning now, and I decided to stop playing video games and maybe go outside and have a cigarette, try and calm myself down. So I stepped out onto my front porch, lit one up, and sat there, lost in thought and contemplation, when I heard rustling off to my right, just like I had before. And then again, I saw the same figure I had when I pulled in. That all-black figure, watching me from the tree line. Instantly, like before, I felt fear, and all the memories and emotion came rushing back only from a few hours prior. It's hard to really encompass all the emotions I felt in that moment, but if there's any way I can describe them, I wasn't going to waste a second. I knew it was watching me, feeling for what I would do next. So I threw down my cigarette, stomped on it on my concrete porch, walked back in the house, locked the door, and went and hid in my room. Now, the next few days played out pretty normally, at least as normal as my life is. However, I'm fairly somewhat acquainted with my neighbors, so I figured I would go and talk to them about it. I know I would probably sound like a lunatic, but just asked if they had seen anything out of the ordinary. Maybe we had some visitors dropping by that we weren't aware of. Maybe people were coming out here and casing our houses. You never know anymore. So I asked one of my neighbors closest to me. We'll call him Bill. I'm not going to tell you his real name, obviously. Asked him if he had seen any strange people around our neighborhood lately. He kind of just gave me this look, like, you should know. And I kind of turned my head and asked him, what do you know? He began to explain to me that while he hasn't been seeing people, he's been hearing these strange sounds off in the distance and seeing these strange things moving around the house in the sky. I asked him, what do you mean strange things? He asked, do you believe in UFOs or aliens? And I just shook my head because I obviously didn't. He told me neither did he, and that he was a staunch atheist. But he had been seeing something moving in the sky that looked like a large craft in the past couple weeks. Strange lights and strange mechanical humming sounds. I told him I had not heard or seen any of those things, but that I was having a nightly visitor. This black shadow that kept appearing outside my home. The only thing he told me is that he has security cameras set up and would let me know if anything appeared on his cameras. So I talked to the other neighbor on the other side of me. She's an older sweet lady as well, just like my next door neighbor, Bill, who I had spoken to, who was a very old, sweet man. While she had no idea about this black figure, or any weird shapes or sounds in the sky or around her, she described having weird sudden feelings of terror, waking up about 3 or 4 in the morning, feeling like she was being watched from inside of her house and out. I explained to her my experiences and my situation, and that even Bill, the neighbor next to us, was having a very similar experience of his own. But yet we were all experiencing completely different things. As the weeks continued to progress, all of these things that we've been experiencing kind of just faded away into obscurity, and everything to my knowledge has gone back to normal. Well, of course there's the pandemic. There's nothing normal about that, but as far as anything alien or supernatural goes, nothing out of the ordinary anymore. So I'm not really sure what that was about. And yes, I've talked to both my neighbors since then, and they've said everything has pretty much returned to normal. So, what do you think happened? What was this all about? Were we being visited by angels or ghosts? Was there a supernatural event going on? Was there possibly a portal to another world? I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to throw out every single paranormal/sci-fi movie idea there could be, because I have no idea how I can explain this away, logically. I was working a graveyard shift for a security job I had at the time. It was about 4 a.m., and it had been a very slow night. Just me and another guard watching 3 different cemeteries from one of those gas station restaurant booths. We were getting pretty bored, and I saw someone coming through the gate, across from us. At first, I thought it was an older woman with dark hair, carrying something. It looked like maybe 2 suitcases or some old military-style duffel bags. But as she got closer to the light posts, my brain sort of stalled out for a moment, and I saw the true horror that lay beyond. She was kind of wispy, like a really hazy black and white moving photo. At first, it appeared like she was floating, but as she passed by the light post, she kind of faded in and out, kind of like a ghost. But there was only one problem with all of this. I didn't believe in ghosts or any of that stuff. Nor did my coworker. So we kind of just looked at each other in a expression that was like, "Did you see what I just saw?" And we both looked back, completely shocked at what we had seen. We clearly had no way to explain what this was. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. There's no way we just saw some paranormal female come out of the cemetery. Well, the rest of that night would get very, very strange. As time went on, we would start to see more figures moving around us, all throughout the night. Not necessarily apparitions or ghosts, but strange figures, short and tall, kind of transparent, but resembling that of people. I thought somebody had maybe slipped us some LSD or something. This was far too much to handle. Accompanying those figures were these strange shapes we kept seeing in the sky, triangles and squares, and not like geometric shapes and patterns you would just randomly see. I'm talking like actual crafts here. First, we're seeing these weird figures and shapes, and the next thing you know, we're seeing these strange lights and things in the sky. None of it made really a lot of sense at all. My coworker and I were convinced we were going crazy and losing it. At one point or another, I got on the phone with my boss and began complaining. "Hey, there's some stuff going on here at the job," I explained to him, and he seemed a little perplexed at what I was getting at. I told him me and my coworker are seeing things that aren't really there. He immediately followed up with a question on our mental health and or our mental state, asked if we had any family history of schizophrenia or other mental illness. I quickly dismissed it, telling him it's not like that we're seeing actual figures moving around outside the cemetery, lights in the sky, and figures. I don't think he really bought it. I thought he thought that we were on drugs or having some sort of mental breakdown or an episode. So, realizing that me and my coworker were entirely on our own, I hung up on my boss and realized we would just have to bear through. All this activity stayed like this for the next several hours, the rest of our shift actually, when finally around 7 a.m., things ended. Our replacement showed up to do the day shift, and we explained to them what a night we had had, and since the sky had changed with sunlight coming up and the light changing, everything kind of seemed to disappear. Now, I promise you, my coworker and I were completely sober. We don't do drugs, we don't drink. This was something we had never experienced before on the job, so we have no idea what any of this meant or what it was. And after this, I actually had the next couple days off. And as it turns out, a good buddy of mine actually got this job too. He's had it for just as long as I had, and he worked nights, the same shift that I had, except during the days that I had off. So come to find out, he actually texted me a couple days later, back right before it was my shift, and says, "Dude, some weird creepy stuff is going on during the night shift. You won't even believe me. You should call me." So I call him and ask him what's up. He tells me he's seeing ghosts and all sorts of weird alien stuff in the sky. Of course, that's not what he said verbatim, but it was something along those lines. I freaked out on him, telling him my exact experiences, with me and my coworker the other night experiencing the exact same things. He said he's going to put in his 2 weeks and that this is too much for him to handle. Well, me and my coworker did the same. We did not stay on that job long, and we have no idea how any of us can explain what is going on during the nighttime there. It's not just cemeteries or ghosts or creepy things like that. There's this whole energy change, a shift in atmosphere. I don't know if it's demons or aliens, or maybe a universe is changing, I don't know. But my boss is going to have to find new night shift workers, that's for sure. This was in the summer of 1986. We were just enjoying the days, enjoying nature and spending time with my good buddies, Taylor and Nick. We'd drive down to my dad's work in Taylor's red pickup truck. Taylor would drive, I'd ride shotgun, and Nick would be in the bed, riding along with our dirt bikes, since Taylor didn't have a truck bed cover. It was about 4 p.m. when we got there. Now, we were exploring what used to be an abandoned construction site for this housing development that never really took off after the economy around here tanked, roughly 10 years prior. It wasn't much to look at, just dirt, turned into small hills by all the dump trucks that transported their loads of gravel onto this lone property. Trees and shrubbery were dying due to the lack of sunlight. The three of us were trying to stay out of sight from all the workers who had been working on this for a while now. We weren't allowed back here since it wasn't safe. Not with the new development and all. We weren't allowed back here since it wasn't safe with all the tools, especially when they would dump their loads from high at the top of the small gravel driveway that would lead up to the highway. After being abandoned so long, they had to have even a larger crew work on this to try and get everything shaped back up in order. We found a place between some hills where we could build a fort, lay down in safety if one of those trucks came barreling down towards us. Nick was getting kind of antsy though, saying he wanted to go home so his mom wouldn't get mad at him for being gone so long. Oh, I should mention, I was 16, Nick was 17, and Taylor was 15. We thought instead of riding the dirt bikes around, because now probably wouldn't be the best time, we would just get up out of the truck and maybe go exploring, see what we can find around us. Nick was saying how his mom wanted him back before dark, and with it being summertime, that gave us at least till 9 p.m., minimum. We felt like little kids, being on this cool construction site development area with the whole world around us. So, we began exploring together, taking twists and turns in the woods that went on and seemed to stretch forever. We explored further and further back. I mean, at this point, we had to have easily been at least a mile or two back when we found something very out of the ordinary. Out in the small clearing, or should I say the center of the clearing, was a very large barren pine tree. Now, around this tree was a very large circle with a pattern etched into the ground. I shouldn't say etched. This circle and pattern was burned into the ground. You know how you kind of see those crop field things? Apparently made by people. It's kind of what it reminded me of, except it was a little bit different. And like I said, the ground was seared. We all took turns kind of investigating the shape of it. It was perfect shape, no blemishes or mistakes. The circle was perfect. But what this large would burn a hole into the ground like this? or sear the gravel. That's when we looked closer, and we noticed weird symbols engraved and burned into the tree. It was as if they were made by some sort of laser or something. You have to remember, this was also 1986. Technology wasn't quite there yet for this to become so public. I mean, sure, surgeries I think used lasers back then, but it wasn't at all as public as it was. We felt like we had stumbled upon some sci-fi exploration and discovery. We all got really creeped out, and we were convinced that whatever had made this was definitely aliens. We didn't have any cameras with us back then, or cell phones, so we just kind of took it in awe. The symbols that were etched into the tree were much different than the symbol that was etched into the ground around the tree. Just like the symbol in the ground, it too was also engraved and burned into the tree, maybe a quarter inch. Something like some sort of tool had done this. There was also patterns too around the base of the tree that were burned into the bark. I also find it weird, and Nick and Taylor did too, that this lone pine tree was completely dead, while all the other shrubbery around it and grass was also dead. But yet, as soon as you walked about 30 feet into the woods, out of the clearing, everything was brimming and full of life. Not a dead plant or tree anywhere around. It's like this clearing was just cursed. We spent a little time splitting up and looking around, even outside the clearing, back into the woodline. We found no trace, signs, or anything of there ever being any engraved patterns or symbols anywhere else, just in this clearing. And it's not like we were that far away. I don't know what part of woods these were, but we were no more than 2 miles back. In fact, I think maybe about half a mile away from here, we found a bunch of soda cans and beer bottles. Clearly, people had been out here partying before. Could it be possible that somebody maybe used a lighter and a tool? I don't know. But then how do you explain the holes in the ground and the giant symbol carved almost into the gravel? What kind of heat would do that? I think all in all, we probably spent about 20 minutes or so looking around, just exploring and taking it all in. We found it very odd and creepy. We were definitely a little unnerved about the whole thing. And that's when we all felt it together in unison. Of course, I mentioned it first, but Nick and Taylor didn't want to admit to it. I think they were too spooked by it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. From where? I don't know. I can tell you from our surroundings that there was nobody else around us. I mean, we had a pretty clear view. I think you'd be able to hear or see somebody. And the woods had noises. There were birds, there were animals chirping about. Life was as usual in the forest. But there's this eerie growing feeling in my gut told me, this is not our territory. We should probably leave. I didn't feel safe. I talked to Nick about it, and while he didn't want to agree with me, I think he somewhat understood because he mentioned, yeah, maybe we should get going. While Taylor just didn't say anything at all. It took maybe another 5 to 10 minutes and we decided to leave. Now get this. As we're walking away, I want to say we were no more than 300 to 500 feet away from this clearing, heading back in the direction of the construction site. And we hear these loud crashing noises from the clearing. I can't exactly describe what the crashing sounds were made from, or what they were, but it sounded like something big was breaking something or destroying something, like a tree being uprooted out of the ground. It was loud, and we would have been fools to run back and see what it was. It scared us. We ran back to the pickup truck, jumped in, and decided that now this would probably not be the best of days to come back. So we drove off home. We didn't talk about it the rest of the evening. And it wasn't for a few weeks until we would meet up again and go back to this place. The next time was pretty much a rinse and repeat of the first, except we didn't have the dirt bikes with us, or the plan to ride them. We tried to park in the same spot on a Sunday where there was no construction going on. We all got out of the truck and agreed to meet up at the exact same spot in the clearing. We wanted to see if there was maybe anything new. Oh, there was. So we made our way the 1 to 2 miles back into the clearing, and we could see it long before we ever got to the clearing. The pine tree that existed that sat in the middle of this 100-foot clearing was gone. I'm not talking cut down. I'm not talking felled, and I'm not talking uprooted and torn out. I'm talking gone, like it never existed. We were in amazement, and we ran up to the clearing. The burned symbols and patterns remained in the ground, but yet anything that was ever on the tree, like the burned symbols and patterns, were gone, along with the tree itself. And where the tree sat originally was just flat ground and dead shrubbery, as if the tree had never even existed. We all kind of scratched our heads and looked at each other. I remember asking, "Do you guys remember a tree being here? Because I could have sworn there's that dead old pine tree that had all the symbols on it." And of course, Nick and Taylor confirmed this, and we all knew we were not crazy. There was indeed a pine tree here at one point, and that was the only one that was dead. And now it was nowhere to be found. So we're standing here trying to figure out what on earth was happening, and maybe we were going crazy, when that same old feeling came back. It just felt like danger, that we needed to leave. And this time, I think Nick and Taylor realized this, because they looked at me like, "What do you think we should do?" Since I was kind of the ringleader of our friend group. I just told them, "Guys, I think we need to get out of here." And they agreed with no arguments or discussion. We left, and to be honest with you, I've not been back to that spot since. The rest of the time, Nick, Taylor, and I were too creeped out to go back. There was just something we can't explain that was in that clearing or the surrounding area. Something bad. I don't want to go as far as saying it was evil, but there was just a bad energy surrounding it. I can't describe by who or what, but you don't want to be there. Now, again, I was a sophomore in high school. When I graduated, I moved out of Illinois, down to Texas for a while, and then over to Nevada, where I still currently am today. And I have since lost contact with Nick and Taylor. What I can tell you, there was some sort of supernatural energy that existed and sat in that area. Not just the clearing, but the surrounding area as well. You can feel it in the air. You could feel the energy. Something was very wrong. I've had no plans to go back and check it out because I'm sure that clearing still exists. The only people that we knew would go back there, or close to there, were probably homeless people, considering the empty, trashed soda cans and beer bottles. But it wasn't like the homeless problem you see today, where there's actually homeless camps. It was just miscellaneous trash here and there. And I don't think anybody could have made these symbols and patterns at all with just a mere lighter, or a blowtorch or something. These were so perfectly done, it looked like a surgical tool had done them. The precision looked like it had to have been done by a machine. So what would do that to the ground? What would do that to the bark? And why was that pine tree no longer there? These are questions I still ask myself even all these years later. Back in October of 2013, I was spending the weekend with my girlfriend in her trailer at Fogwood Oaks campsite, about an hour drive from where I live. There are several lakes around this area, and it's known for being one of the best places to fish, due to its close proximity to many popular fishing spots. As you can imagine, because it's so close to these fishing spots, there are plenty of bears in the surrounding woods. At this time, I was currently studying up to become a wildlife biologist at Vermont Technical College up until December. On this particular day, my classes got out early, so I decided to take advantage of that, getting back earlier than normal and having some extra free time for fishing. By the way, I'm a 24-year-old male from the state of Vermont. My name is, well, I'll call myself David. I really love camping and spending time outdoors. Back in college, like I said, I was planning on becoming a wildlife biologist, but had to take some time off due to family financial situations after they lost their home during the recession back when I was only 19. When that happened, it threw me into a bit of a depression. But my family always supported me, which gave me the encouragement that I needed to get myself out of this slump. I managed to graduate with a degree in forestry at Mountain College. Now, instead of being a wildlife biologist, I've decided to take a more darker approach cryptozoology. The truth is that even though my parents were well off when I was younger, my parents knew nothing of anything about cryptids, UFOs, aliens, the paranormal, the supernatural, etc. And this is why I ended up taking an interest in these things at an early age, like many kids do. In fact, throughout high school, I actually paid for my own college education with the money I had saved up by working part-time. Well, at least a part of a tuition fee, of course. Not all of it. Trust me, I still have a lot of student loans. Having said that, though, even though I worked hard for my degree, I had a rough time. Anyway, let's fast forward to the actual story. On this particular day, I woke up very early, before sunrise, so I can get all my fishing gear together, including my backpack containing my food and other equipment. And this way, I would be prepared to leave by sunrise once everything was packed up in the back of my truck. Come to think of it now, what's strange is how, even though there were probably at least 20 lakes around here, I only made it to Lake McClure, on the other side of this wooded forest, about an hour's drive. To be honest, it's because it's my favorite place to fish. Lots of trout and hardly any competition. You end up with all the fish you could ever want. So, before leaving, I placed all my gear in the back of my truck, which included camping equipment, food supplies, and for everything else that was needed for a full day's expedition out into the wilderness. Once that was done, I headed out towards Lake McClure and started preparing everything that would be needed for me to go fishing this early in the morning, when it's still pretty dark out. But before I started a fire, I went ahead, set up my tent so that I would be ready for the rest whenever I got tired of fishing. From there, I made myself a small breakfast consisting mostly of just cereal, with enough for me to eat it all. Afterward, I began getting everything else together. Even though Lake McClure is supposed to be one of the safest places to go camping in, due to the lack of dangerous predators like bears and mountain lions, you can never be too careful, so having a campfire was always necessary no matter how safe other people say the woods are. So, after waiting a while, I began fishing, right when sunrise was beginning. It took me a little while before I got my first bite. Even then, I only managed to catch a small trout, which isn't really that surprising, due to all the people who come here. Most of these fish have been all over, so they're not very easy to catch. And since it wasn't exactly a big surprise that nothing would be biting this early in the morning, I went ahead and had everything ready to go. To be honest, what's really strange is how there wasn't another soul in sight during the entire time I was there. It was like everybody else knew that it wasn't safe to go out this early. I mean, why? Even though I have always had a strange feeling about coming here for some reason, maybe it's just me. Even though this is my favorite place, I've never had anything strange happen. Until this time. The next thing I saw was a large object in the sky hovering towards the lake. It kind of looked like a giant cube of sorts. Its outer edges bending and warping, as if they were made out of never-ending liquid. And it wasn't long before I saw yet another identical object coming from the opposite direction, towards the first one. When both of these objects met each other, they started melding together until there was now what seemed to be a large oval shape hovering over Lake McClure, just like those two smaller ones had been earlier. But as soon as I thought that last thought, my entire world became an utter nightmare. For some reason, I felt myself being pulled up into the air, and everything around me instantly became distorted. Time itself was warping and changing. It's like somebody cut out all the life of me and replaced it with a bad dream. All I saw then was darkness, and all I could hear were incoherent whispers of a language I did not understand. I couldn't feel anything around me. I was lost. I was hopeless, trapped in this void of an unforeseen force, more dangerous than you can imagine. I woke up to a very bright light in my face, and I could make out these dark shapes around me. I wasn't lying down that I could tell, but everything around me was white, just really bright. My vision was extremely blurry, and I don't really remember much. My memory is very foggy on this part, because I had gone out several times. During this, I had no true sense of how time passed. It felt like it was forever, but at the same time, felt like it was only a couple of minutes. But here is the kicker. When I eventually came back to being conscious, even remotely, I was lying on my floor, in my house. Not in my room, nothing. My truck had been reported missing, as well as I had, for 3 weeks. Apparently, when I had woken up, I had been missing for 3 weeks and 2 days. Nobody had known about my whereabouts, and somehow, I don't know if I'd been in a coma or what happened, but 23 days of my life was just gone. You could imagine to everybody's horror, shock, and surprise to find out that I was actually okay and not harmed in any way. The police were involved, and I was questioned, of course, asking what had happened to me and my whereabouts. To be honest, I really don't know. Only what I can tell you is just that last I remember, I was fishing and then I saw that cube in the sky, where those objects merge into one oval shape, and then I was sucked into something, like a void of a force. And then, the next thing I know, I wake up to that brightness and those figures in the distance. It was very strange, and then I wake up and I'm on my living room floor, in the exact same clothes and outfit that I was in the exact day that I apparently went missing. I have no idea what happened in those 23 days. It is just a complete and utter lapse of time. Nobody believes my story, and they think I was either kidnapped and drugged, or God only knows. I myself have no idea what it could have been, but I have speculation that I could be a victim of alien abduction, although I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and what you think happened to me. I was driving home from LA to parts unknown late one night when I saw a loud flash of light out of the driver's side window. After hearing a large crash and seeing this flash, I pulled my car over to go look for any signs of an accident. But as I walked towards where I saw the flash originate from, all that remained were some broken trees with some smoke billowing up above them, suggesting there may have actually been a crash. And keep in mind, this was out in the middle of nowhere. There were no other cars on the road, and I assume I just noticed a freak military accident. So, after noticing this, I did what any other good Samaritan would do. Immediately called 911 on my cell phone. And shortly thereafter, several men in military-styled suits would show up, along with several military vehicles. Men stormed the area, and I was detained almost instantly, put in the back of a van, and questioned about what I knew. Not only were there military personnel, but also several Secret Service-looking guys, with their suits and glasses and all. I was asked about what I saw, what I knew, and what I heard. Extremely confused by all of this, I assumed I had stumbled upon some secret military crash site, or maybe there was a military weapon or some sort of craft that I was not supposed to see. I was uncuffed and sent on my way. I was also told not to tell a soul about anything that I saw, heard, witnessed, or experienced. And well, to be honest, what I witnessed, heard, and experienced isn't very much, so I thought I would share it anyway. I hope you find this useful, and I have no idea if anything that I saw, heard, or experienced has anything at all to do with UFOs or aliens, but it makes you wonder, especially why so many military and Secret Service-like men showed up. What were they trying to retrieve? What were they trying to cover up? Something happened to me a few years ago that you would have never believed unless you were there. I was on a fairly busy road, but it was late at night, so there weren't too many other vehicles around. It was a shame, in a way, as even more witnesses would have made even more people take notice. However, what happened was enough for me to completely change my mind on the existence of UFOs. I had my radio turned on. It was playing some sort of rock music, which I was drumming my fingers along to on the steering wheel. I was on my way back from work, a commute I do most days. Only this evening, I had stayed on for a birthday meal with some colleagues of mine. It was drizzling, but not heavy rain. I could still see okay out the windows. Cars were passing by, all with their lights on. Everything was just fine, and I was about 20 minutes or so from home. The last time I remember actually looking at the clock, it read 11:50 p.m., and I recall thinking, thank God it was a Friday, and I could lie down and sleep in the following morning. And that was when it happened. The radio began stuttering, flicking between music and static. That wasn't too surprising. There's dead spots all over this road. The next thing was a bit more odd, as the radio began flipping through channels rapidly. Rock music began being replaced by other songs and speech and static. It was distracting, but I didn't think too much of it. I just thought the radio itself was acting up. I turned it off, and that was fine for a few seconds. Then it came back on by itself, and it also turned the volume up full blast, which was awful, as it hurt my ears. I turned it off again, and that was when the entire engine cut out. No warning sign. Just 1 minute the car was working, and the next minute it wasn't. I immediately panicked. Not quite at this point, but I believed I had broken down in the middle of a busy road, even though it was quite quiet at this time, in the middle of the night and the rain. There had been a car not too far behind me. I glanced in my rearview mirror to see if they had noticed my predicament. The last thing I now needed was to cause some sort of midnight pileup. But oddly, I couldn't see any movement. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, assuming I should call AAA, and messaged my wife to let her know what happened. But unfortunately, my phone was dead, completely out of battery, as now it wouldn't even turn on, which was very odd. It was around 60% before I left the restaurant when I texted her to let her know I was leaving. I'm not a social media type of person, so I don't have loads of tabs and windows open or anything to drain my battery, and I'm pretty good about keeping my phone charged. Plus, I have a charger in the car. So now, I had no car, no working phone. I'm not usually one to panic, but this was really beginning to cause some serious concern. I was just about to get out of the car, and not that I'd be able to see anything, but it just felt like the right thing to do. Then, I get a shock as everything suddenly turned back on again. The car, including the radio which was back to the station, and the level of sound I'd chosen. My phone, clearly showing 60% battery in full bars, although something was still off. I looked quickly behind me and saw the lights from where I had just looked, and not seen the car that I had been sure had been following me. Did that mean I experienced the exact same thing? This couldn't be possible. And that was when I looked at the clock on the dash and realized what was still off. Both my phone and the clock on the dash said it was 3:15 in the morning. Somehow, we had jumped in time by 3 hours. I just continued on home, in a state of shock and disbelief, thinking there must just be some mechanical, technological misfunction. Somehow, still thinking that maybe something happened, and I would walk through the door just after midnight. I opened the front door, went straight into the kitchen, checking the clock on the cooker. 3:35 a.m. Thankfully, my wife hadn't awakened and panicked, so I crawled into bed and lay there until the next morning, then told her what had happened. I'm lucky she believed me. I guess I should tell you where all this happened. Having listened to your channel, I know a lot of your stories tend to come from the United States. Well, I live in England, but I think most of your American listeners will have heard something that is close to me, even if they don't know the name of the towns. You see, I may have a long commute each day and have to drive on a very busy road, but there is one sight I never tire of seeing: Stonehenge. This all happened just as I was passing by Stonehenge. Complete loss of power and time. I can't think of any other reasonable explanation other than that night that I witnessed UFO activity. I can't give you any specifics. I really shouldn't even be writing this. I would be fired, or worse if someone found out. But people have to know. I work in a sect of the military. That's all I'll say. It just lets you know that I have access to certain information. I've been privy to things that, well, civilians wouldn't believe. But I can assure you, there is proof of extraterrestrial existence. I can't be more specific. What I can tell you is that I was sent along with a team to investigate an aircraft that had been discovered, shall we say. There wasn't much left by the time we got there. We only had witnesses. There wasn't much left, as I had said. The witnesses had statements that it had been indeed an aircraft. A very clear video from a phone, which, alas, will never be seen on social media or the press. I know, because I still have access to that phone. What was left of the vehicle was taken away and tested. It was, of course, constructed of unknown material. There was very little left, but we were able to get one clear example of non-human DNA. DNA that we would never have been able to identify, as it does not match anything previously recorded. Of course, if I was to go back and try to run the tests again, it would be impossible. Another bizarre feature of the unknown material was that after exactly 5 days, it vanished. And I don't mean somebody took it. There is no one further up the line of covert ops than me. And of course, everything is under strict security. Nobody saw a thing, and the cameras caught nothing. One moment it was there, and the next gone, vanished. I do have plenty to compare it to, though. If I tell you that this case number 43, just in my time in this role, then you might have some inkling as to the scope of the true UFO activity. Right now, I'm working closely with many different government agencies, some known to the public, others are underground, kept secret, but I'm sure many of you will probably find no surprise in that. That's all I can really say for now. I will tell you now, there's a huge PSYOPs campaign giving so much false information on TV and the media over the years. They want you to think that it's all fake. But somebody did get it right. Agent Fox Mulder. Sure, you're probably laughing, thinking it was a fictional character from a 90s show. But one thing he said that I want you to realize is more important and more truthful than anything else you'll see on TV. The truth is out there, really. I'm trying to end this on a positive note, to make you laugh, just to let you know, the truth is stranger than fiction. And as I get more time, I'll try and reveal more to you secretly. When I was just a kid, around 10 or 11, something happened to me. For years, I thought it was a nightmare. Something brought on by watching or reading something I shouldn't have, or just an overactive imagination. I never spoke of it. Didn't even really think much about it, to be honest, until after a couple of days. Until my sister mentioned something to me. We were sitting, having a good drink, when she suddenly, completely out of nowhere, mentioned the gray man. It might sound like a total cliche, but I honestly felt like right then, someone had punched me in the face. The nightmares came flooding back in an instant. Seeing the gray man in my bedroom, I told her, "I don't remember ever telling you about my dream." And she looked at me so puzzled and said, "What dream? You never told me about a dream. I'm talking about the night I saw the gray man." And then it all came out. She remembered being about 13 or 14, and that would tie in with my age. We both recalled the exact same dream. It was the middle of the night, one winter. We both remembered it being winter, as we could both recall Christmas lights in our room. Our mother loved the holidays, and the whole house would be decorated. We were lying in our beds when the window slowly opened. We lived in an older house, and still had old-fashioned sash windows that you opened by pushing one of the panes up. This slid up, and we were able to see the curtains moving slightly in the breeze. He then appeared. The gray man appeared through the window. As we talked it through, what happened was exactly the same for both of us. Absolutely identical. His face and arms appeared first, and then he pulled his body through. He was tall and thin, like one of those sticky, stretching men that you throw against the wall and then watch them tumble down. He was completely naked, but didn't seem to have anything to define him as male or female. No visible genitalia. His body was completely smooth like silk, or like a store mannequin. His skin, a slate gray. Kind of white, but not. There were no real facial features aside from his eyes, which were large, round, and entirely black. No pupils or whites, just two round saucers of black. No nose or mouth were even visible. He must have been around 6 to 7 feet tall. Neither of us were certain of this, as we were both still growing and had no real concept of height. We could just tell that he was very tall. His arms and legs seemed extra long too, long and thin, and his hands and fingers were very long, like his fingers were twice as long as a regular person, very spindly. He stood and stared, and my sister said the same. We had the exact same dream, at the exact same time, about the exact same gray man. He didn't do anything to either of us. Not that either of us could really recall anyway. And there was one more similarity. Now, I know that's entirely possible to fall asleep and wake up the next moment and find that it's morning. That hole my head hit the pillow, and I didn't stir for hours. But that didn't happen to us often as kids, or teens to be honest. Our family had never been the best sleepers, and we're both usually early risers too, despite being all bleary-eyed from lack of sleep. But that night, we both slept in way past when we should have. Woke up feeling like we just only gone to bed. How was it that we had both had the same vivid dream? Was it because it wasn't an actual dream, and we were both truly visited by the same man? We'll never know for sure, I guess. But one thing I know for certain. I went straight home, put locks on every single window I have. That's something I'll never forget about. I'm sure there is enough horror in this world to fill 100 books before you even start to look at the paranormal and extraterrestrial type stuff. But I'm going to tell you something that happened to me when all things, I was just minding my own business and taking my dog for a walk. We don't live near Roswell or any UFO hotspot. Nothing like that. I ain't heard of no little green men or flying saucers ever being reported around here before. And I am 100% sure of that. You want to know why? because right now I'm a deputy for a sheriff's department. Anything suspicious, I would know about it or have dealt with it. I'd clocked off for the day and come home from a nice long walk. My dog, who I'd been taking out walking, had been cooped up all day and needed a good stretch. I'd had a long day and needed a good relaxing walk with my dog. We always go back to this section of woods. I ain't ever seen anything out there. Never have. My dog does her thing, and then we go home. But not this time. My dog's a real good girl. Never has any listening problems. Well, this day, she is off her leash, and off like a rocket, straight through the trees up ahead, towards where I know there's a big old pond. She doesn't ever go in there. She doesn't like to be dirty. I call to her, but nothing. She ends up coming back to me, and that's not like her at all. So I follow to where I saw her run off. I call to her, but nothing. She doesn't come back to me, which isn't like her at all. So now I'm concerned and follow her to where she ran off. And that was when I saw, well, this thing. I'm going to explain what I saw best I can. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'll try. First off, it was dark behind the trees. Now, I know about cover, but it doesn't mean it was darker because of the trees. It was like nighttime, just in that one spot where my dog was. And my dog was gone. I scanned all around, calling her name, looking everywhere in the spot I'd seen her run to. I even looked to the water, but nothing. All the while, the hair on my arms were standing up. Even though I don't believe in anything supernatural, something in my instinct and gut felt completely off. I continued to call my dog's name, and then I heard this strange whirring noise coming from above, in the sky where it was dark. I can now see there was something up there that was making it dark. If I tell you it was a spaceship, I would only be guessing from stuff I've seen on TV and in movies. But I saw the shape, and that's what it made me think of. Then I saw the famous beam of light that they always seem to show in the movies. It was so incredibly bright, brighter than anything, any light I've ever seen. I had to turn away and shut my eyes. It was only for a second or two, and I opened them. Then, I opened my eyes like I said, and my dog was sitting right next to me, looking as if she had been there the whole time. And you know what else? It was suddenly daylight again. There was no shape in the sky blocking out the light anymore. I stood there for a moment or two, looking at my dog, trying to recollect reality. She seemed fine, but she wasn't going to run off and leave me. That was for sure. In fact, she wouldn't leave my side for days. Slept on the bed with me too. Something happened in those woods. 1 minute she was there, the next gone. 1 minute, that sky was black, looking like the Millennium Falcon was right there. And a bright sky and my dog was back, and it was all done and gone. Ain't nobody gonna tell me that that was a normal situation. I really don't know what it was. Part of me wants to admit that maybe it had something to do with UFOs or aliens. And that's a struggle for me, because I don't believe in that. I think it's just a bunch of hogwash, if we're honest. Hoaxes that have been perpetuated by culture and media. But maybe it's time I reevaluate those thoughts and feelings, because I clearly can't deny what I experienced on this very day. Thanks for hearing me. Okay, so something really weird happened to me, which I still cannot explain. This won't take long, as I have barely any details, but still, I wanted to share it. I was out for a run one evening. I do this all the time. It helps me unwind. It was summertime, so not too dark. I was able to head out, roughly 10 p.m. I didn't see anyone else, but that's not unusual. I wear a Fitbit so I could track my distance and keep an eye on the time. I was only planning on a short run that evening, a couple of miles at most, and I was heading towards woods. And then, I woke up in my bed. I'm not leaving on a huge gap on purpose. I genuinely have no recollection whatsoever of what happened between the hours of 10 p.m. and went out and 10 a.m. when I woke up the next morning. Still in my running kit, including my sneakers, lying on top of my bed. When I checked my Fitbit, it showed that I had ran 10 miles. I have no idea what happened. I was stuck in a complete daze. The only other thing I remember is that I switched on the news, and there were reports from local people saying they had been hearing strange noises in the neighborhood last night, that at around 10:15 approximately, there had been a very loud bang, like a clap of thunder overhead. Somebody suggested a sonic boom. The news anchor had no explanation. There were lots of reports of a sound, but no sightings. Something had happened that night for certain. I have no idea what it could have been. My story begins with something that I didn't think had any connection to aliens. I was at my wit's end, with stress and anxiety. I began having panic attacks. They progressed to the point that I stopped wondering if I would ever stop having them, and I began wondering when my next one was going to be, and what I'd be in the middle of doing when it would hit. I'm not a man of great means, so the really potent pharmaceuticals that many people resort to for anxiety were not an option. A coworker suggested that I try meditation. Okay, he called it mindfulness, but call it what it really is, meditation. If only I had known what I was really getting myself into. The results at first were slow, but when I had it down, being able to just let go of my thoughts before they could worm into me with roots, spreading panic and distress, I was hooked. To simply be, and to not have to worry about bad thoughts and nerves stressing me out. I got to the point where I was meditating every single chance I could spare. The 10-minute sessions were the most rewarding, but I got in 30-minute sessions, and longer when I could. So, I started to see things, mostly flashes of light. I thought they were produced by passing traffic in my peripheral vision. But then, I noticed the lights when I wasn't anywhere near roads or cars. Here was a new source of stress. I found out that flashes of light could indicate detaching retinas and other horrible things. I used my meager insurance to get a checkup, and they couldn't find anything wrong with me. Not on the tier of coverage I was stuck on. So, I tried to meditate even more. I realized too late that there was a connection between the intensity of my meditation and the lights. By the time I understood, it was too late. The lights were there to stay. They had grown in intensity. Sometimes there would be one large, one swinging in the sky, like it was suspended by an invisible pendulum. Other times, they swarmed around me when I would pass through a dark room. After a week of following me around like that, I went to bed one night, relieved to see that there weren't any lights keeping me company. I fell headlong into a deep sleep. I was jarred awake by a tugging sensation that was pulling me up. I opened my eyes, but that was all I could move. I could not move my arms or my legs, and I distantly realized that I didn't have any arms or legs. I wasn't in my body. Whatever form I was in, I was riding a beam of blue pulsating light up through my ceiling and into the night sky. I could see my neighborhood down below. I could see the blinking lights of commercial airplanes closer than I had ever seen them before. I tried to cry out, but I couldn't. After a few seconds, I perceived that I was in some kind of container. It seemed cylindrical. The air around me felt charged, and there was an omnipresent white light that made it difficult to see. The loud voice boomed inside my head, the words completely unintelligible, at least at first. It would not stop talking. I gradually noticed that each time it spoke, it was in a different language. I recognized French and Spanish. Then there was English. The voice asked me what I wanted. I fired back that I wanted to know what they wanted. The gentle reply was that I had taken the initiative to contact them first, and I had done so with unusual intensity. I was confused and a long silence set in. Then, the voice asked me if I wanted to advance my existence, whatever that meant. I replied that all I wanted was to be rid of my anxiety and my panic attacks so that I could properly function on a day-to-day basis. There was such a long silence after that. I thought they might have forgotten about me, but they had not. I was shot out of that cylinder, or whatever it was, like a cannon. Then I was back in my bed. I felt completely shaken up, and yet somehow felt serene at the same time. I didn't have any more panic attacks. I seemed to be incapable of feeling anything intensely, but I didn't mind so much. I was able to function and get through the day. I couldn't muster up a sense of urgency about anything. It was an adjustment to be so calm about literally everything. My very personality had been rewired. Sometimes I feel like I'm an imposter and inhabiting my body. But this is my new life with my new self. I'm not upset that I don't have panic attacks anymore. I love that part. But I'm a bit taken aback at what it cost me. If those were aliens that did this to me, then I guess that even they haven't perfected medicine and healthcare. I've done research on how meditation got me in touch with some form of higher life, and apparently, it's something that just happens. The whole point of meditation in ancient times was to contact the divine, and it looks like that's a door that's still open. I guess those were aliens. I didn't see an actual ship or beings, just lights. Whatever they were real, because what they've done to my brain and body is very real. That's all I have to share with you. Sorry about the long email. Thank you for reading. When I was a teenage girl, I spent the summer evenings with my best friend on the roof of my house whenever we had sleepovers. I don't know if my parents ever really knew that we were up there or not, but we would slip out of my bedroom window onto the room and stargaze and talk about everything. One ordinary night, it was a new moon, so the stars were especially clear. We didn't talk as much as usual, completely in awe of the night sky. At the same time, we both noticed one star that was unusually bright. It began to wobble in place. I stared at it, waiting for it to become an airplane or a shooting star or something. My eyes felt very heavy, and I shut them for a few seconds. When I opened them, my friend was gone. I began to feel a panic rising in my chest, and before I could call out, my eyes grew heavy again. I shut them. When I opened them, my friend was beside me again. We had intended to lay out there on the roof for only about an hour. When I lifted my head and began to look around, I could see the light of the sun starting to peek over the horizon. It had only been a few minutes, but we had somebody passed the entire night on that roof. I mentioned to my friend that what I thought had happened when she was no longer beside me. She just looked at me like she did not understand what I was saying. It took me all day, but I noticed that her entire manner had changed since that night on the roof. She did not have much to say and had a very absent way about her. I could not get her to be excited about anything. She would still do stuff with me, but she wouldn't laugh or scream or anything. It was like the person I knew had just dried up. No matter how many times I went over that night in my mind, I couldn't pinpoint anything that could explain the change in my friend. Well, the day came when I had to have a tooth pulled. I leaned back in the dentist's chair. She shone the light in my eyes, and that was the fall of the first domino. That was when I truly understood what deja vu was. I was instantly aware of memories that I'd been carrying, but unable to access. Memories of being in a medical environment, bright lights in my face, leaning back in something like a chair. Someone, or rather several people in the room with me, intensely focused on just me. I was able to maintain my composure for the dentist, but I couldn't stop shaking. I had to speak to my friend as soon as possible. I found her, and I babbled about everything that I was suddenly remembering. That was the first time in years that I had seen anything like emotions on her face. She looked confused. She thought that I had always remembered those things. She had remembered them from the very night that they happened, when we were on the roof and saw the strange light. I asked her what all she could remember. She said that she remembered very invasive things occurring, things that at the time were horrifying and nearly broke her. But then, one of the figures took her by the hand, which was shackled at the wrist to the chair she was in, and she was told not to worry, that they would make sure that they did to her wouldn't bother her when they were done. She woke up feeling very serene, and she stayed that way ever since. The events of that night would cross her mind, but they wouldn't bring any feelings of distress. After long pauses, she mentioned that the people had also said that her friend wouldn't even be able to remember her procedures. That must have been me. I know this story is rather anticlimactic, but there it is. From what I remember, we were taken somewhere. Things were done to us, and we were left with the rest of our lives to wonder what it all was. Even now, I'm still wondering. I'm an overnight truck driver. I've seen some messed up stuff in my time on the road, but at the very least, I never saw anything that I could not explain. At least, not until the one night that things add up to me nearly losing my job. It's not unusual for me to try and cut corners as innocently as possible when I'm, well, behind schedule. I'll do an extra couple miles an hour to get back time that I've lost. Things like that. So I'm pushing what's acceptable, speeding on one lonely highway in the middle of nowhere in Central Oregon. I start to see flashing lights behind me. I pulled over, hoped that I had the current insurance card. I waited and waited. And then I wondered what was taking so long. I looked in the mirror. I thought my mirror might not be adjusted, since I couldn't see anything. No, it was fine. I stuck my head out the window and looked back. There was no cop car, which naturally made me question where the flashing lights were coming from. I really don't have the words to describe to you how I felt when I realized that the lights were not behind me. They were above me. They were hanging in the sky, right over my truck. I tell you, that was the eeriest feeling. And there wasn't any loud noise like from a chopper. For 1 second, my skin felt like it was on fire. As soon as I yelped, though, there was nothing. No lights, no burning, nothing. I was just sitting in my truck while it idled. I pulled up my GPS to find out how to get back to where I was. Something had to have been wrong. Before I got pulled over, or whatever, I had a solid 12 hours left to slog through the road. According to the GPS, I was only 4 hours away from where I was trying to go. So yeah, I got there on time. Plenty of time to spare. I was so early that I decided to kill a couple of hours before checking in. Well, I got caught. I thought I was going to lose my job, but they were tracking my GPS the entire time. There was a point where, according to the map, my truck somehow jumped from one county to another. They figured I had nothing to lose, and I told them my story. They listened. They looked at me like they believed me, just about as much as I believed myself. They let me off the hook, and I kept my job. With that kind of anomaly in their data, there was no way to know for sure if I was truly speeding at a certain rate on company time. They don't really confirm that something strange happened, nor do they deny it. But I'll say, it was very, very bizarre, and has really opened the thoughts in my head to aliens being a true thing. I have timber on my property, and it's not unusual for me to stay out well past sundown. I am mesmerized by the way the sky can change from the beginning of the sunset to the twilight to total darkness. My story brings me to one balmy summer night when I was treated to an especially fiery sunset. I was so entranced that I failed to notice a dark shape silhouetted against the sky. It was dark and round with a single blue light, mounted in the center like an eye. It hovered over my property for a long time, long before I ever noticed it. I was intrigued and wondered if I wasn't being treated to seeing some sort of experimental army aircraft. The air around me began to vibrate as the thing hovered lower and lower, almost against my will. I felt apprehensive. I was truly fascinated, but some force outside of my consciousness was telling me that I shouldn't stay out in the open. I kept watching the sky, but I backed into the trees where I would be able to still see the thing as it lowered down, until it was just a few hundred feet off the earth. The air was vibrating so much that a deep bass filled my ears. The blue light shifted to red, and the fear I felt grew and began to overshadow my fascination. A writhing mist appeared on the ground beneath the craft, and the vapor shrunk in on itself and became three shapes. Two were humanoid with long features, especially in the arms and the legs. The third figure had a stiff way about it, as if it were mechanical. I understand how ridiculous this sounds. Without hesitating, the three figures headed straight for me. I did the only thing that I could in that moment, climbed a tree. I wondered if I had made a mistake, since they stopped at the base of the tree. I could feel whatever eyes they had were on me. One of them made a half-hearted attempt at climbing, but was unable. The second tried as well, but could not. The third figure, the stiff one, began belching some sort of vapor from its mouth, with a hissing noise. It had a pungent, acrid smell, and I could feel my head getting light, and my limbs getting heavy. I was falling asleep. The vapor was some sort of sedative, and it was working with alarming speed. My grip was starting to loosen no matter how much I focused, so I had to think fast. I saddled up next to a thin branch and unbuckled my belt. I looped it around the branch. I didn't accomplish this feat a moment too soon, since I blacked out as soon as it was secure, When I woke up, I was still in the tree and was hanging by my belt like a poorly engineered harness. It was uncomfortable, which to me was a testimony to its efficiency of the alien narcotic. I felt unnaturally sluggish, even for somebody who had just woken up. A cursory examination of my property revealed nothing strange. I tried to see if perhaps the vapor had been released from some sort of canisters, but nothing. There was simply no evidence of any alien presence. So what do you do with a story like that? No damaged property, no real harm. You can't call the cops. So I guess that's when you can tell somebody that can share your story, like you guys do. I just wish I had proof, because I know I sound crazy, but all I can do is tell you my story happened, and I'm living proof that I went through it. I was driving down a highway in Arizona when a large elongated shadow was cast over my vehicle. It looked as if a semi-truck was going to fall out of the sky on me. Guessing by the shape of the shadow, no such impact ever happened. The shadow stayed over me when I sped up. The shadow stayed over me when I slowed down. I checked all my mirrors, and then I pulled over so I could look up. Of all the UFO stories I'd heard that I thought were garbage, they were the ones where the witness reported a craft that was cigar-shaped. Guess what I saw in the sky? Some mysterious hovering aircraft that was cigar-shaped. A large reflective cylinder, flying lengthwise, and very interested in me for some reason. Well, I wasn't interested in it. I got back to driving, and I tried to outrun it, although it was pointless to even try. I felt my car start to leave the pavement a few times, as if it were being lifted skyward. That's when the panic caught up with me. I swerved. I did everything I could to keep it from zeroing in on me, if that's how it even worked. I began to cry. I wanted to call my husband and ask him for help. What was he going to do? He was a whole 2 hours away at work. And before I could have a total breakdown, this thing randomly broke off its pursuit, and I never saw the likes of it again. Now, I'm terrified to even drive that road, and large shapes or unknown things in the sky can freak me out. Yeah, I guess you could say I'm a believer in UFOs now.